All right, welcome to another deep dive. You know how it is, you're here because you don't have time to wade through all the fluff, right? You want that aha moment, but without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly.
So today we're tackling something pretty crucial, and that's how we solve problems when things get messy. We're leaving those nice, neat little puzzles where you can see all the pieces behind. We're diving into what happens when the rules get, well, fuzzy, the outcomes are uncertain, or maybe the environment just flips the script on us. Or, even wilder, we're stepping into the complete unknown. We've pulled together research papers, articles, all that good stuff, cutting-edge AI, robotics, optimization theory, all to help us, well, make sense of this.
Yeah, we're basically tossing out that rule book that says everything's predictable. So we'll be looking at situations where, reaching a good outcome is the only thing that matters no matter how you get there. Then we'll jump into those environments where your actions could have a whole bunch of different results. Oh, and then we'll tackle cases where you can only see a tiny bit of what's really going on. And then the ultimate test, navigating when you have zero map, no directions, nothing. And we'll even touch on environments that aren't just step by step, but continuous.
Okay, so much to unpack. Let's start with those times when what matters is just landing on a good outcome, not so much how we got there, right? Think about that classic 8 queens puzzle. It's all about arranging those 8 queens on a chessboard so none of them can attack each other.
Yeah.
Now, the steps you take to get there, totally irrelevant. It's that final peaceful arrangement that we care about. And this kind of end state focus, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Designing computer chips, super efficiently, figuring out the best factory layout, scheduling all those crazy complicated tasks, making our phone networks run smoothly, even managing investment portfolios.
Yeah, and what's really cool here is this idea of local search algorithms. Instead of trying to remember every single move you make, you just start with a possible solution, right? And then you peek at the other solutions that are similar, that are close by. So you basically hop from one attempt to a slightly tweaked one without keeping a detailed diary of everywhere you've already been.
So it's kind of like messing around with the settings on your phone to get the best picture, right? You tweak one thing, then another, but you don't necessarily remember all the combos you've tried.
Exactly.
Sounds way less overwhelming than mapping out every single possibility.
Way less. And because you're not lugging around this huge memory of every path, local search is amazingly memory efficient. And this is perfect for problems that have just a gigantic, sometimes even infinite number of arrangements, the kind where a traditional search would just crash and burn.
Yeah.
And these algorithms, they're often used for optimization problems. That's where you're trying to find the absolute best state judged by some kind of measure, which we call, an objective function. Basically, your scorecard for how good a solution is.
Okay, so picture a landscape, right?
Yeah.
Every spot on this landscape
Yeah.
is a possible solution. Now, the height of the land at that spot,
Yeah.
that represents how good the solution is according to our scorecard, our objective function.
Right.
So let's say we're trying to find the best possible state, the most profitable investment strategy. Well, we're searching for the highest peak on this landscape, the global maximum.
Yeah, the summit.
Exactly. But, if we're trying to minimize something, like the energy used by a computer chip, then we're hunting for the lowest valley, the global minimum, and the whole process of climbing uphill to find that maximum that's hill climbing and going downhill to find the minimum that's gradient descent.
Yeah, that's it. And the most basic form of local search is the hill climbing search algorithm. It starts with a random solution, and then at each step, it checks out all the solutions that are just a small change away.
Like its neighbors.
Exactly, its neighbors. It picks the neighbor that's got the best score, according to our objective function, and it moves there. Keeps doing this, always going uphill, until it hits a spot where none of its neighbors are any better. It's reached a peak.
So it's like you're trying to, reach the top of Mount Everest, right? But it's super foggy, and you've also got a bad case of amnesia.
Okay.
You can only feel the slope right around you,
Yeah.
can't remember which way you've been. You just keep stepping in the direction that feels steepest uphill.
Perfect analogy. Now let's bring this back to our 8 queens puzzle. Any valid arrangement of those 8 queens, we can call that a state. To find the neighbors of a state, we look at all the arrangements we could get by just shifting one queen within its column. That gives us 56 possible next moves.
Okay.
Our objective function here is actually a cost function. We count how many pairs of queens are attacking each other, and our goal, get that cost down to 0.
So basically, an arrangement with a high cost is bad, and one with zero cost, boom, that's our solution. And hill climbing, it's like you're looking at your current setup, seeing how many attacks there are, and then checking out all 56 possible moves. You pick the one that cuts down those attacks the most.
Right.
And you keep doing that until you can't make a single move to lower that attack count any further.
Right.
It's all about that immediate improvement. But the tricky part is, sometimes the path to the absolute best solution isn't the one that looks the steepest at the start.
Exactly. That's why this hill climbing is often called a greedy local search. It's always snatching up the best immediate improvement, no peeking ahead, no big picture strategy.
Short-sighted.
Yeah. And while it can get you to a good solution fast, the problem is you can get stuck.
The pitfalls. I'm guessing it's not always a straight shot to the global maximum, right?
Not always. There are a few main reasons why this hill climbing can trip up. One is those local maxima.
Yeah.
Imagine a smaller peak, right? Near Mount Everest. It's taller than everything immediately around it, but it's not the actual summit. Hill climbing. It would leave you stranded on that smaller peak because from there, every step takes you downhill.
Right.
In the 8 queens problem, you might hit an arrangement where any single queen move actually makes things worse, increases the number of attacking pairs, even though there's a much better overall setup out there.
So you're on a high point, but not the highest.
Exactly.
Got it. What else can mess things up?
Ridges. Think of a long rising ridge, but the sides are steep drop-offs. A hill climbing algorithm, it might keep making moves along that ridge, hitting a bunch of local maxima, but it can't easily step off the ridge to get to a potentially much higher peak nearby.
Right.
And then you've got plateaus, those flat areas on our landscape.
Right.
These could be flat local maxima where there's like no uphill exit, or they could be shoulders where you could eventually go higher, but that flat terrain gives you no clue which way to go. A simple hill climber, it can just wander around aimlessly on a plateau.
So it sounds like you can get stuck on false winds, trapped on winding paths, or just lost in these flat zones.
Yeah.
Not exactly the most efficient way to find the best solution.
Not exactly. For the 8 queens problem, basic hill climbing gets stuck about 86% of the time.
Oh, wow.
Only finds a solution in about 14% of attempts. But here's the thing, whether it succeeds or gets stuck, it usually happens really fast within just a handful of steps. So there's this trade-off, speed versus reliability.
Okay, so how do we make our hill climber a bit, I don't know, less likely to get lost? Can we give it a compass or something?
Well, one simple improvement is allowing sideways moves. If none of your neighbors are better, you can move to one that has the same score, hoping it's a shoulder that'll eventually lead up.
Right.
But you got to be careful not to get stuck in an infinite loop on a flat local maximum, so you might limit how many sideways moves in a row you'll allow. And it's interesting, this tiny change, it makes a huge difference for 8 queens. Success rate jumps to 94%. But it does mean both successful and unsuccessful searches take more steps on average.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to take a little sidestep to figure out the way forward. What other tricks can we use?
Well, there are stochastic variations. Stochastic hill climbing, it randomly picks from the uphill moves, but it gives higher probability to the moves that lead to a steeper increase in our score.
Okay.
And then there's first choice hill climbing. That's another stochastic approach where you just randomly generate potential next states until you find one that's better than your current one. This is super helpful when you've got a ton of possible next moves to consider.
So instead of always picking the absolute best immediate step, you sometimes take a slightly less optimal but still improving step, or you just grab the first improvement you see.
Right.
It sounds like that randomness could help you wiggle out of those local maximas.
It could. But maybe the most effective improvement is random restart hill climbing. The idea is simple. If at first you don't succeed, try again. You just launch the hill climbing search from a completely different random starting point.
Yeah.
Do this over and over until you finally hit a solution. This method, it's actually guaranteed to find a solution eventually. We say it's complete with probability 1 because if you try enough times, you're practically guaranteed to stumble upon a starting point that either is the solution or leads to it quickly.
Right.
The average number of restarts you'd need, it's just the inverse of the probability that a single climb will succeed. So for 8 queens without sideways moves, it's about 7 attempts on average. With sideways moves, it drops to just over 1. Even for like massive 8 queens problems, millions of queens, random restart hill climbing can find solutions shockingly fast.
So even if the landscape is super bumpy with tons of false peaks, just starting over in a random spot gives you a good shot at eventually finding that true summit.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, how well any hill climbing method works, it really depends on the shape of that state space landscape.
Right.
If you only have a few local maxima and plateaus, you're likely to find a good solution pretty quick. But a lot of real-world problems, especially those that are really tough to solve, what we call NP-hard problems, they have incredibly complex landscapes. Exponential number of local optima makes it much tougher to guarantee you're finding the absolute best solution.
Okay, so hill climbing and its, variations, they're handy for finding those good states, but they can get stuck. So what are some more, I don't know, advanced ways to avoid those local optima traps?
One really powerful technique is called simulated annealing. It borrows its inspiration from metallurgy, heating a metal to a high temperature, and then cooling it down really slowly to make it strong and stable.
Okay.
So, to escape those pesky false peaks, we sometimes need to take a step down.
Counterintuitive.
It is, but we do it strategically and less often as we cool down our search.
So it's kind of like shaking that bumpy surface we talked about, right?
Yeah.
To help that ping pong ball bounce out of those shallow dips, but you gradually reduce the shaking.
Exactly. The simulated annealing algorithm, it's a lot like hill climbing, but instead of always picking the best move, it picks a random neighbor. If the move improves things, lowers the cost, we always take it. But here's the twist. Even if the move makes things worse, we might still accept it.
So you're deliberately allowing some bad moves. That sounds, I don't know, a little risky.
It might seem that way, but the probability of accepting a worse move depends on two things: how much worse the move makes things, and a temperature parameter. This temperature, we gradually lower it over time. At the beginning, when the temperature is high, there's a bigger chance of accepting a worse move, which lets the algorithm explore more widely, potentially escape those local minima.
Okay.
As the temperature drops, the chance of accepting bad moves gets smaller, and the algorithm starts acting more like regular hill climbing, settling into a good solution. If you cool the temperature slowly enough, there's even a theoretical guarantee that you'll eventually find the absolute best solution.
So it starts by being adventurous, exploring widely, and then gradually focuses in on the most promising areas.
Exactly. And simulated annealing, it's been successfully used on a huge range of tough problems. Figuring out the ideal layout for components on a microchip, scheduling all those complex tasks in a factory, and tons of other large-scale optimization challenges.
Okay, so simulated annealing throws in some exploration by sometimes allowing those downhill moves. What other approaches are out there?
Well, there's local beam search. Instead of just tracking one potential solution, you keep tabs on potential solutions, like a beam of possibilities. You start with k random states, and at each step, you generate all the neighbors for each of those k states. If any of those neighbors is a solution, you're done.
Right.
Otherwise, you select the best neighbors from the whole bunch and repeat the process. It's like sending out gate explorers at the same time.
So it's like running several hill climbs in parallel, but instead of each one being totally isolated, they're all sharing their intel, contributing to a pool of, promising directions.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key difference from just doing random restarts. In local beam search, if one of your parallel searches stumbles upon a particularly good area, the other searches will tend to move towards that area in the next step.
It's like they can communicate, right? Like, hey, over here, the grass is greener.
Exactly. And that allows for this information sharing between them, helps them ditch the less promising paths faster.
Okay, that sounds more efficient than just starting over from scratch multiple times. But couldn't you still run into trouble if all of your searches end up huddled around the same local optimum?
Yeah, that's a real risk. To tackle that potential lack of diversity, there's a variation called stochastic beam search.
Okay.
Instead of just picking the top k neighbors, you choose the next set of k states with a probability that's, proportional to their score. This means even the less promising states have a tiny chance of being picked, which helps keep some variety in your beam, maybe leads to discovering better solutions that are just a bit outside the reach of the top contenders. It's like giving those underdogs a chance to shine.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned evolutionary algorithms earlier.
Sure.
That sounds like it's borrowing ideas from a whole other field.
It does. Evolutionary algorithms, they're a whole family of these stochastic beam search methods, but they're inspired by, natural selection in biology. The basic idea is instead of one lone explorer, you send out a whole team. And the most successful ones, they get to share their secrets to create even better explorers. That's the magic of these algorithms.
So how does that actually work?
You maintain a population of individuals. Each individual represents a potential solution to our problem. the individuals that are most fit, meaning they have the best skulls, according to our objective function, they're more likely to reproduce and create offspring that form the next generation. This reproduction process often involves recombination, where parts of the parent individuals are combined.
So it's like a computational version of survival of the fittest with genetic reproduction thrown in.
Exactly.
So cool. What are some of the ways these evolutionary algorithms can differ?
Lots of variations. One is the population size, how many potential solutions you keep in each generation. Another is how you represent each individual. In genetic algorithms, which are very common, individuals are represented as strings of characters, kind of like a simplified DNA sequence. But in other approaches, like evolution strategies or genetic programming, individuals might be represented as sequences of real numbers or even whole computer programs that evolve over time.
Wow, evolving computer programs, that's mind-blowing.
It is. And then you have other important aspects like the mixing number, which is how many parents are involved in creating offspring. Usually it's two.
Okay.
Then there's the selection process for choosing which individuals get to be parents, often based on that fitness score. After selection comes the recombination procedure, like crossover in genetic algorithms where you take parts of two parent strings and swap them to make new offspring.
Got it.
The mutation rate that determines how often you introduce tiny random changes into the offspring's representation. And lastly, there's how you form the next generation. It might be all new offspring, or you might keep some of the best performing parents from the previous generation so you don't lose good traits. That's called elitism.
Okay.
And sometimes there's culling, where the least fit individuals are just, well, removed.
So many moving parts, but the core idea, right, is selecting the best, combining them to create new possibilities with a bit of random tweaking.
Right.
It's a way to explore a massive search space.
Exactly.
How would this work for our 8 queens problem?
Let's say we use a genetic algorithm for 8 queens. Each individual in our population, it could be an 8-digit string. Each digit represents the row number of the queen in that column, the fitness of an individual. That's the number of pairs of queens that are not attacking each other, because we want to maximize that. We then pick parent strings based on their fitness, maybe using a method where the fitter individuals have a higher chance of being chosen. Then we pick a random crossover point in the 2 parent strings and make 2 new offspring by taking the first part of one parent string, combining it with the second part of the others, and vice versa.
Okay.
After crossover, we might randomly mutate an offspring, change one of the digits with a small probability. This whole cycle selection, crossover, mutation, it repeats over many generations. The hope is that the average fitness of the population will gradually go up, eventually leading to a solution where no queens are attacking each other. It's like shuffling and tweaking good arrangements, hoping to stumble upon the perfect one.
So it's similar to the beam search, but with this extra element of combining promising solutions in new ways.
Precisely. Genetic algorithms, they're like stochastic beam search, but with this added crossover operation. And this can be a real advantage if certain blocks of genes, certain parts of our solution representation, they contribute to good performance. Let's say, for example, placing the first 3 queens in specific non-attacking positions is a consistently useful part of a solution.
Okay.
Crossover lets this block be combined with other useful blocks that have evolved in different individuals. The theory behind it talks about schemas, which are like templates for good solutions. The idea is that schemas that lead to above-average fitness, they'll become more common in the population over time. But for this to work well, you got to carefully think about how you represent your problem so these schemas match up with meaningful pieces of a solution. Now, there's still debate about why they're so effective, but genetic algorithms are used in a bunch of areas, designing circuit layouts, scheduling complex jobs in factories, even automatically designing the architectures of those deep neural networks.
Wow, that's fascinating. We've covered a lot, from simple hill climbing to these super intricate techniques inspired by nature, all to tackle the challenge of finding good solutions in these, tricky situations.
Yeah, it's been a journey. Now let's shift gears a bit and look at situations where the environment itself throws in some curveballs. What happens when our actions don't always have one predictable outcome? Or when we can't even fully see what state we're in?
Okay, so this is like moving from the tidy world of well-defined puzzles to the messiness of real life, right?
Exactly. In these non-deterministic and partially observable environments, our solutions can't just be simple to-do lists of actions.
Right.
We need more flexible strategies,
Mm.
often called conditional plans or just strategies.
So instead of just turn left at the next corner, it's more like turn left, and if you see a stop sign, then stop. Otherwise, keep going.
Exactly. Think of this, erratic vacuum world.
Okay, I like it.
Our vacuum cleaner, it's a bit temperamental.
Let's say.
If we tell it to suck in a dirty square, it'll usually clean it, but sometimes it might clean a neighboring square too. Other times, it might do nothing at all.
Oh, come on.
And if we tell it to suck in a clean square, it might even drop some dirt. So the outcome of our action isn't guaranteed, right? It can lead to a whole bunch of possible next states.
That sounds incredibly frustrating to work with. How do you even start making a plan in a world like that?
We have to start thinking in terms of belief states.
Yeah.
That's the set of all the possible physical states the agent could be in, given its past actions and what it's observed. Our plans need to be conditional.
Okay.
For example, in our erratic vacuum world, a simple suck sequence that might not guarantee a clean floor because suck is so unpredictable.
Right.
We might need a plan like suck in the current square, then observe which squares are now clean, and based on what you see, decide the next action.
Right.
Our solutions start looking more like, decision trees than straight paths.
So the environment's unpredictability forces us to be way more adaptable, more reactive in our planning.
Exactly. And to find these conditional plans, we can use something called and/or search trees.
And/or search trees.
Yeah. In those nice deterministic environments, our search trees have OR nodes.
Okay.
They represent the agent's choices of which action to take. But in non-deterministic environments, we also have AND nodes.
Okay.
These represent the different possible outcomes from a single action. For a plan to be considered successful from an AND node, it has to lead to a solution for all those possible outcomes. It's like saying, if I do this and this happens, I have a plan. And if that happens, I also have a plan.
So at an OR node, we just need one of our actions to eventually lead to the goal. But at an AND node, every single possible result of our action needs a follow-up plan that eventually reaches the goal.
Exactly. A solution in an AND/OR search tree, it's a subtree that has a goal node at every leaf, picks one action at each OR node, our choice, and includes all the outcome branches at each AND node, the environment's possible responses. And we can use these, recursive algorithms like AND/OR search to find these solutions. One crucial thing we got to handle is the chance of cycles, situations where we might end up back in a state we've already visited.
Right, going in circles.
Exactly. We need to spot these to stop our planning from going on forever.
So even when things are uncertain, we can still explore those possibilities systematically and come up with plans that can handle different outcomes.
We can. But things get even more interesting when we move to partially observable environments.
Okay.
This is where the agent sensors don't give it the full picture.
Right.
It gets percepts limited pieces of information.
Okay.
So it doesn't know for sure which state it's in, just which ones are possible.
So it's like navigating that foggy Mount Everest again, but now you can't even see your feet clearly.
Exactly.
You're getting these vague clues about what's around you, but you're not sure exactly where you are.
Perfect analogy. In these situations, our belief state becomes super important. It's the set of all the states that could be true based on our past actions and the percepts we've gotten.
Okay.
Sometimes our actions might even be mostly about gathering more info to reduce that uncertainty.
So sometimes you act not to get closer to the goal, but to figure out where you are in the first place.
Exactly. Now, there's this interesting type of partially observable problem, the sensorless or conformant problem.
Okay.
This is where your percepts give you absolutely no info about the current state. You might think these are impossible to solve, but sensorless plans can actually be useful. Think about those broad-spectrum antibiotics. When a doctor prescribes one, they might not know exactly which bacteria is causing your infection, but the antibiotic is designed to work against a whole range of possibilities.
Right.
So in a sensorless problem, you take an action knowing it'll have a certain effect regardless of which possible starting state you're actually in.
Okay.
The solution is a sequence of actions that's guaranteed to reach the goal no matter which of those initial states you started in. We essentially search in the space of these belief states, and in that belief state space, the problem becomes fully observable.
That's a really cool concept, shifting the problem from the uncertain physical world to the world of what we know, even if what we know is just a set of possibilities.
Exactly. Now, when we look at general, partially observable environments where we do get some percepts, even if they're incomplete, updating our belief state gets a bit trickier. we have this percept function. It tells us what we'll observe in a given physical state.
Okay.
Because different physical states can produce the same percept, when we get a percept, it helps us narrow down which states we think we might be in.
So a percept acts like a filter,
Mm-hmm.
helping us eliminate some of the possibilities from our current belief state.
Exactly. And the way we transition between belief states and these partially observable problems, it happens in 3 stages: prediction, possible percepts, and update. First, based on our current belief state and the action we take, we predict the new set of possible states we might end up in. Then, for each of those predicted states, we figure out what percept we might receive. This gives us a set of all the possible percepts. Finally, when we actually get a percept, we update our belief state to only include the states that could have produced that specific percept. It's a loop act on your beliefs, observe the outcome, and then refine your beliefs based on that observation.
So it's a constant back and forth.
Yeah.
Acting, observing, updating our understanding of where we are and what's happening.
Exactly. And we can use and/or search again, but this time we're searching in the space of these belief states. Our conditional plans, they'll test our belief state, the set of possible physical states, because that's all we have access to. Maintaining this belief state, this process of monitoring, filtering, or state estimation, it's a core task for any intelligent agent operating in the real world where it doesn't have perfect information.
It sounds like dealing with uncertainty, whether it's in the outcomes of our actions or in our ability to perceive the world. It adds a whole new level of complexity to problem solving.
It does. Now let's consider the ultimate challenge: navigating an environment that's totally unknown.
The truly uncharted territory. So in that situation, what do we even start with? What information do we have?
In online search, our agent works by weaving together computation and action. It takes an action in the real world, sees the immediate result, and then figures out its next action based on what it just experienced.
Okay.
This is totally different from offline search, where you try to plan everything out before taking a single step. Online search becomes essential in dynamic or unpredictable environments, and it's completely necessary when we have zero prior knowledge of the environment. Think about exploring a maze you've never seen before. You take a step, look around, and then decide where to go next.
So we're exploring and mapping as we go, kind of like trying to navigate a new building,
Yeah.
or even like how a baby learns about the world through trial and error.
Exactly. In a basic online search problem, we usually assume the environment is deterministic, meaning our actions have predictable results, and fully observable, meaning we can see the outcome of our actions. The agent knows the actions it can take in its current state, the cost of each action, and it can tell if it's reached the goal. But, and this is key, it doesn't know the result function. It doesn't know where a particular action will lead until it actually tries it.
So it's like knowing you can go north, south, east, or west, and knowing how to check if you've arrived, but you have no map, no clue what's in any of those directions until you take that first step.
Exactly. The agent's goal. Still to reach the goal with the lowest cost. To judge how well an online search agent does, we often compare its path to the path an agent with a complete map could take. For this comparison, we use the competitive ratio. We want this ratio to be as small as possible, meaning our online agent's path isn't much longer than the optimal one. One of the big hurdles in online search is the chance of hitting a dead end, a state with no way to reach the goal.
So you could wander into a corner or a loop and get stuck.
Exactly. And without a map, you can't always avoid these completely. Our basic online search strategies, they work best in safely explorable environments. These are environments where there's always some path to a goal from any state you can reach. Think of a reversible maze where you can always backtrack.
Right.
But even then, if there are super long and winding paths, we can't always guarantee a great competitive ratio.
So how do these online search agents actually work? What's their strategy?
Well, after each action, the agent gets a percept telling it the new state it's reached. It uses this to update its internal map of the environment. Basically, it's recording. When I took action A in state S1, I ended up in S2. This growing map then helps it decide what action to take next. Because we're moving through the environment and learning as we go, it's often more efficient to explore locally. Kind of like how depth-first search works offline. You explore deeper along one path before backtracking and trying a different direction.
So you wouldn't just jump all over the place randomly when you have no idea what's out there. Makes sense.
Exactly. And one basic online search algorithm is the online DFS agent.
Online DFS agent.
It keeps track of an internal map, which actions it hasn't tried from each state, and the states it hasn't backtracked from. When it's in a state with untried actions, it tries one. If it's tried all the actions from the current state, it backtracks to a less explored state. Worst case scenario, it travels every connection in the state space twice.